Good morning, everybody.
Morning.
So I was going to narrate a terrible and vicious struggle survival tale today, but I will decide to leave you and just say that eventually we managed to get the screen working, and now we're ready for the presentation. My name is Alan Leipzig. I'm a teacher of the Broward County School System, and I am going to be talking kind of about our theme for this year's Darwin Day. Each year we have a theme. We've done fossils, we've done oceanic stuff, and I keep suggesting each year that the theme is dinosaurs, 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 and one day I will get it. But I want to talk today about the diversity of life, about all the different ways that life happens, and just touching about some of the things that would have gotten Charles Darwin about 200 years ago to say, why is all this stuff kind of there? Now, when it comes to diversity, I grew up on nature documentaries. This was my introduction, and for my generation's introduction before we had the internet, the ability to watch animals engaging with people like the pleasant David Attenborough on the screen, or theoretically tearing themselves apart. Kids come into my class and they talk about the nature documentaries that they have today. And I understand that the nature documentaries leave a little bit something to be desired in terms of scientific accuracy. But I assume that there's still a good nature documentary somewhere. This is the kind of stuff we have to deal with in the classroom. It turned, at the very least, the best that I got this year is convincing the one girl who really believes in mermaids the correct scientific language to talk about how wrong she is. So I consider that a success. But in terms of nature documentaries, my favorite was always the ants. Because when you're watching an ant nature documentary, you are basically watching a six-legged version of the first 20 minutes of Saving Private Ryan. There's death and destruction and body pieces everywhere. But you can put it on PBS. So you can sandwich it on Saturday morning. And for a young Alan, for whom the pronouncement has come down, Saturday morning cartoons are too dangerous. You may not watch Chuck Norris's Karate Commandos. This was the best thing since sliced bread and peanut butter. And a whole generation of mine grew up on these kind of nature documentaries, and the generation before them. But if you go back further than TV, there would be another source where you could get this kind of talking about the wonders and varieties of life. No, not Chuck Norris. Charles Darwin would have been the nature documentarist of his day. Now, he wouldn't go on TV and then get run around and chased and stick his finger up alligators and whatnot and whatnot. But his first book was not about how things got to be the way they were. His first book was about his travels, because Chuck started out his life absolutely useless. He tried to be a doctor, and it didn't work, because in those days, if you wanted to be a doctor, you couldn't go online and then take a look at wonderful old dissections. What you would have to do is say, go into the lecture hall, and then your lecturer would say, this is Mr. Green from the village. He's going to have his gallbladder removed. These two lovely gentlemen will hold him down. Does anyone have a bit of wood? Oh, Mr. Green, put this bit of wood in your mouth, and we will now cut into him. You might not want to be in the first row if you're wearing white today. And of course, for Darwin, the lectures lasted on average a minute and a half before he had to go outside and throw up. So he was terrible at that. He tried being a minister, but all he wanted to do was collect beetles, so he was terrible at that. So he was able, the last minute, to jump on a naval ship in order to speak to the captain. Now, the captain knew that Darwin wanted to look at animals around the world, but that wasn't really his thing. The captain was worried that he was going to kill himself. Because Captain Fitzroy had just gotten this ship called the Beagle. He was supposed to go around the world. He was supposed to map the entire coastlines. And the previous captain had killed himself. And Fitzroy, proper English gentleman, thinks, well, what if I'm going to go crazy on this? I'm not going to have anyone to talk to except sailors that need me. I can't talk to them. My uncle killed myself. I'm really terrified of killing myself. So he decided, I'm going to pay someone my own social structure, which, for those of you in the audience who don't have a history background, means someone who's able to likes you on Facebook, basically. And he will talk to me throughout the voyage. And so Charles Darwin was the designated conversationalist. And everything that came afterwards, 5 years of climbing mountains and finding 20,000-year-old giant sloth poop and eating one of everything he encountered, to the point where Darwin at one point said, okay, this bird I'm eating, this is the lesser species, this is the rarer one. Can we send my leftovers to the British Museum? And did from one continent over, which is why it always astounds my wife that I cannot get my leftovers home in time without leaving them in the car overnight. But Darwin was really the first kind of nature popularizer at the time. But he had hobbies, not the kind of hobbies that we are allowed today in technology. But Charles Darwin's hobbies went to, for some reason, he was fascinated with an organism that my family calls flying rodents, because that is the proper Negro term for a pigeon. Now, you can breed pigeons, although one would question what benefit they're doing for humanity. I think they're cute, but then again, I tend not to look down when I walk around on city streets. But if you breed pigeons just the right way, you can create incredible variations in the pigeon. It's one of the things that Darwin realized. And you can see over here, all of these are pigeons. Even the one on the upper right looks like a turkey. And you can get incredible variation by just deciding, I get to choose who lives and who does. Yes, every pigeon fancier is something of a megalomaniac, even that goes to the current day. But if you choose, I will only have the pigeons breed who have the longest tail feathers, to the longest tail feathers, you can get the incredible turkey birds. This is called artificial selection. This is how everything in your produce department works. I have a dirty secret, kids. This is a banana. This is the original form of the banana. If you took a bite into that, it would be like grabbing a handful of Jell-O wrapped around watermelon seeds, which is a drink I think that I had at my wedding. And you can see, they have seeds are large and black and entirely filled with it. It's squash. It kind of looks like a turd. But if you breed the bananas with the smaller seeds, and the ones that are more like your hand, then over hundreds of years, you have something that you are unafraid to drape over your ice cream. Terrifyingly, this is how broccoli happened. Broccoli was deliberate. Someone decided, I'm going to take wild mustard, and I'm going to make broccoli. You can see that they made kale, and they made cabbage, and they made broccoli. Like, I'm going to breed the one with the biggest flowers, and you get broccoli. And for some of you, I will have to apologize for that. We did broccoli, and it wasn't just a simple mistake. We did it over a long period of time, and we're not sorry about it. But it's not too bad with cheddar cheese on it. Well, I tell my students this. The next thing they ask is, what is the feasibility of inventing a time machine? It's fascinating what we could do if we put our minds to it. There's a scientist in Russia that wanted to see if you could make foxes domesticated. He took silver foxes and he made a pen about the size of this room. And he released them. And of course, they were all pressed up against the wall, terrified of him, kind of looking like a 6th grade dance. But the foxes that came a little bit closer were the ones who got the food, the ones who were allowed to breed. The foxes who got a little bit closer were the ones allowed to breed. In 27 generations, he got foxes that would walk up to you and do the tail waggling thing. Foxes that would look up and go, and their ears started to change, to become floppier. It's literally survival of the cutest. Now this is what we do with a lot of time on our hands and research brains that we're really good at writing. But nature can do even more incredible things. You get a longer time. It can create the diversity of the world. And rather than give the long, in-depth explanation, which will be happening several times today, I want to give you examples of places and times in which the world has had something incredibly diverse. And I want to end with like the weirdest ecosystem in the world. Now, this is a bird. I say this because this is a proper bird. This is what we recognize as a bird. It's flying, it's got a beak, it has feathers. Admittedly, there's ostriches, but it kind of looks and acts like a bird. Birds are a very proud family, constantly name-dropping where did you go? Constantly name-dropping their famous relatives at parties. So you see, this is one end of how the bird family went long ago. But I want to talk about my favorite bird, because it shows how different things get adapted to different places. And when I say my favorite bird, it's not anyone you would have heard of. My favorite superhero is Aquaman, so you can see I like the underdogs. This is a kakapo. Kakapo are the world's largest, fattest parrots. They live on one island in New Zealand. They are completely flightless. The problem with the kakapo is they've been in a very safe place for a very long time. The late, great Douglas Adams, writer of The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, describes the kakapo's defense mechanism thusly. When in danger, a kakapo will run up a tree, and then, if the danger continues, the scared kakapo will leap off a branch. Sources vary as to what will happen at that point. Either the kakapo will flap wildly, and its useless stubby wings will act something like a parachute, or it will fly like a brick. The thing is, you don't get that happening very much because you don't have scared kakapos. I mean, look how lovely these guys are. They landed on this wonderful island filled with food a few million years ago with no mammals, no predators. So rather than adapting to survival of the fittest in a way that it has conflict in it, imagine if humanity was stuck for years inside a gigantic red lobster. So that the only thing you had to adapt to was, how can I get to the buffet before that guy who takes all the shrimp burgers? The kakapo could have gone the same way as the dodo. The dodo was a pigeon. Yeah, you can breed pigeons into just anything. But if you leave something without predators for 3 or 4 million years, they forget what it is to be scared. And so when Spanish soldiers who are bored take their clubs out and come on to the island, a dodo will just look and say, what's that guy doing with Bob to that stick? All that red stuff coming out of Bob. Hello, Mr. Stickman! Kakapo did not do well once we added mammals in New Zealand. These are basically a giant Happy Meal for cats. There are 150 kakapos left, which I consider something of a human success because there were 50 kakapos left when I first read about them. They're not very good at breeding, having a very hard time finding mates, and occasionally mistaking the back of BBC cameramen as females of the species. The noises they make on the YouTube video are hilarious. But this is an example that if you leave life sequestered and alone at a point which is kind of weird, they will learn to play the game of life. They will learn to get food in odd ways. You can leave everyone alone on Australia for a few dozen million years, and you get the extreme hardcore continent filled with poisonous things. It's surprising to me that humans stayed on Australia, as they were, when they went there 40,000 years ago, they would have found Komodo dragons the size of buses. And yet they're still there, which, Australians will do just about anything if you can keep the Guinness flowing. Going out of birds, I love spiders, which is why my wife thinks I'm weird, one of the reasons. If one of the spiders ends up in our house, I'm the person designated with the paper and the cup to perform the humanitarian act of shuffling it outside. And if my wife finds a spider while I'm not home, she's pleasant enough not to tell me. The bodies of these spiders all here generally look like what we recognize as spiders. The behavior of all of these you could probably guess. Mostly sit in a web, wait for easy lunch, stay on Twitter all day. I love the one on the bottom right-hand corner that has spikes on its white horned butt. Those hang out outside my classroom. But within spiders, they spread across the world. Sometimes by flying, and that terrifies people. And so they found very interesting ways to act. This is a spider. It looks like an ant. It stays around ants and occasionally eats them, which would make a great horror movie. But it's not as cute as the next spider, which I would love to have, like maybe 2 feet long. This is Bagheera Kitlingi, which, yes, is named after the panther from Rudyard Kipling, The Jungle Book. It's a spider named after a Disney character. And the cuteness does not end there. I mean, you can just look at its fuzzy little face, and it's eating plants. Bagheera Kitlingi was probably like all the other spiders, wanting a good fly snack, maybe having a little bit of an ant. Beetle's a great meal. But it ended up in an area where all of the food was spoken for. So some of them started nibbling on plants, and that managed to supplement their diet so that they were able to survive. And some of them got better at it, better at it. You were looking at the world's only vegetarian spider. Like me when I was a vegetarian, it occasionally cheats and maybe eats a little baby ant, but mostly it's a spider that eats only vegetables. Now this is the male. The male spider was found in 1896. It took 100 years for all the people who were looking at the males to figure out what the female looks like. So we spent 100 years without knowing what the female of the species looks like, which kind of reminds me of my high school Dungeons and Dragons club. But spider sex is like that. There's kids in the audience, so I'm going to use metaphor too for this. But this is a couple. In nature, this is called sexual dimorphism, meaning the male and the female look different. And I don't mean like Kanye West and Kim Kardashian different. I mean, that is a male and a female. So, picture, if you will, having to go on a date where your date is the size of a school bus to you, and if she gets very irritated, she will eat you entirely. So you may want to sneak out at some point. And that is my 10th grade dance to a T. It's incredible what we do in order to keep reproducing. The anglerfish is a great example. Now, all the kids in my class know the anglerfish because all the kids in my class have seen Finding Nemo. It's the thing with the light on the end of its head that attracts other things because, hey, it's a light. What's that? I've never seen. Oh, good strategy. Every anglerfish you've ever seen has been female, but you've seen some males. You just haven't realized it. If you look at that little white thing on the back and the little thing on her nose, that's a male anglerfish. It turns out, for this species, they diversify. They evolve. It was easier to just have the females do all of the work and have the males mostly focus on reproducing. The jokes write themselves. And what the male does is he's born without a stomach. He's going to die really quickly unless he finds a mate. So the male anglerfish bites the side of the female anglerfish. His lips start to melt off. His internal organs start to melt. His mouth becomes part of her. His cardiovascular system links up with her. They share blood to blood, which is probably the only really romantic thing about this. And at that point, he becomes his wife's testicle. Are my parents in the audience? No, I'll just be safe anyway. They might watch this later. And it's a great strategy. That's the way life works. Every living organism is trying to make a living. And if there's a way to make a living at it, you'll find really weird things. This species couldn't work if the males were also getting enough food. There's just not enough food down there. So let's have the males just be testicles. Once again, the jokes write themselves. There's another species of desert lizard in the United States, which only has females. They've evolved beyond males. Darlings of 70s feminism. And occasionally, they mate with each other just to remind each other what it's like, and that reminds them that they're pregnant. But they're all equal clones of each other. If one is Kathy, she dates Kathy and gives birth to Kathy. I swear I saw that on Star Trek at some point. Crocodiles were a great example of diversity. Right now, we got 21 species of crocodiles left in the world. The asteroid that ended the dinosaurs did a number on their family tree. But over the past 100 million years, as crocodiles spread to different environments, you got crazy stuff. The one on the bottom, usually referred to as duck croc, was about this long and would have also been a great pet, keeping it near my Johnny Vegetarian spider and scaring my child into screaming, I assume. But you can look at all the other things and realize these are crocodiles. The one on the top, we have something that eats like a whale. We have running crocodiles. We have vegetarian crocodiles. If you leave life out there, like a suburban people like Jeff Goldblum would say, life finds a way. If there's some way to get a new type of food, if you experiment, you realize, I might not die if I keep eating that weird thing. Keep doing that for long enough, and you will adapt to eat that weird thing. One of my favorite kinds of crocodiles is the boar croc, which would have been a running crocodile 93 million years old, with teeth that probably would have been able to completely go through my head. I really wish I knew about this when I were in the Dungeons and Dragons Club. I would have had this eat all my friends. There are two really weird ecosystems on Earth I want to talk about. The most bizarre places that life finds a place. This one doesn't use sunlight. The next one is weirder. And if we're talking about diversity, this is a great way to put it. Darwin's book was very successful in helping his ideas along because for people in Victorian England, they didn't realize how diverse the world was. Before we had the Animal Planet, mermaid documentaries aside, people didn't know how odd life was around them because you only saw the stuff where you lived. If you want a great example of that, watch the original Dracula. Because in the original Dracula, within the first few minutes of it, inside Dracula's castle, Jonathan Parker, terrified, sees a pack of armadillos. And no, there are no armadillos in Transylvania, but the thing is, in 1931, before nature documentaries, before the internet, people didn't understand stuff that wasn't in their area. They didn't have access to a good local library. Once again, 1930s. So, if you had a place as remote as Transylvania, you could show armadillos. And people would just assume there was some weird vampire thing, which would also make a really great movie. Not to mention that Vampire Armadillo would be an amazing name for a punk band. This is the bottom of the ocean. Not every part of the ocean can do this. There's only a few places. But it's kind of incredible. This is parts where the crust of the Earth is cracked enough that giant clouds of chemical smoke come up. Superheated. You can see that it looks kind of weird and cloudish-like. That's because it's hot enough to melt lead. If you stuck my hand there, I'd be dead. I'd be dead by you getting me there to begin with, but it'd be a really great way to clean up the body and the most elaborate murder ever. That would be the weirdest CSI episode I can think of. There is life here. And it doesn't use the sun at all. The first step of this food chain of the black smokers are these tube worms. You're going to see them outside the tubes in a future slide. The tube worms are white, or that's the shell. Their actual worm is red, and they don't have any guts. I'm not insulting them. They really don't have any guts. They are a living red velvety sock. Inside them is just bacteria, and the bacteria feeds on the chemicals, and the tube worm eats the extra bacteria. And it's a great relationship we call symbiosis, where one hand washes the other. Well, one cell membrane washes the other, but you get the point. And the tube worms, in turn, are the food of everything else around. You have pale fish here that have almost never seen light. And of course we're seeing light here because this ecosystem is so amazing and so remote and so unexplored that now just about any time you go, there's some IMAX camera captures some kind of documentary footage. We'll put that to the side for the moment. They will eventually adapt to the idea that they get to eat whenever they hear someone speaking in a British accent into a screen. There are crabs over there to the side. You can see the crabs are crawling over the tube worms and eating them. You'll find shrimp in these areas. It's a gigantic ecosystem at the bottom of the ocean. Every so often these smokers turn off after about 20 or 30 years, and all the life has to go to the other smokers because they're all going to be dead within a year or two. And this has succeeded. Beyond imagination, after millions and millions of years, they're still out there. We only figured out that they were there in 1974. But this is not the weirdest ecosystem I want to talk about today. I want to show you something where the diversity of life can be even stranger than a deep-sea smoker. And you get very weird organisms around in this ecosystem. You probably have never seen these guys because they need a little bit of magnification. But let me talk specifically. These are mice. This is Demodex. The Demodex mite is one of my favorite little guys. I feel very close to them. They do not have butts. They live a buttless life where once they've eaten too much, they explode. Much like something out of the Monty Python episode. They find a place in their ecosystem which is absolutely filled with food, where other living things have died off. They stick their head down and they have their bubbles up in the air, and they live there in this bizarre ecosystem, a strange ecosystem where every so often these little packets of liquid gather and explode. It's an ecosystem which is covered in 200 different kinds of bizarre little plant-like things that are constantly eating the ground. A weird kind of pinkish, purplish brown, depending on where you are. It's the kind of ecosystem where the ground falls away, and herds of these things, with gentle cow-like beings, crawl across the ecosystem and eat up all of the fallen ground. I have about 2,000 of these myself. You can see here over there crawling over a carpet. Underneath the floor of this ecosystem is a giant chemical laboratory in which different bizarre molecules are adapting and changing and even trying to kill the ecosystem itself and feed off of it. So you have a wide variety of bizarre little blobs who exist just to protect the ecosystem from being destroyed. And then there are things that crawl across the surface of the ecosystem. Gigantic. The original one, this is friggin' Godzilla. This thing clings to the trees of the ecosystem, occasionally drinking from the lakes, and I think I've given away the game here. You can see that this thing is a sucker, and that it drinks liquid from its ecosystem. But you can finally see the color of this ecosystem. In some cases it's pinkish, in some cases it's darker. All of these things are things that live on and in the human body. The human body is covered in 200 species of bacteria. You are a zoo with 200 different types of bacteria. That's the kind of zoo where it would be 5 times the size of Miami Metro Zoo. 20 different types of fungus are eating you. The little Demodex mites that I said at the beginning, they live in your eyebrows. They live in your eyebrows. They eat whatever hair and whatever skin has fallen off. They're perfectly harmless. If one of your pimples burst, it might damage them. They come out at night on your face to scoodly poop, I'll say, because there are children in the audience. They stuff on your face. And if you don't know what stuffing is, ask some Yiddish parents, because they had to do it at least once. They live with you. They're a population. You are an ecosystem. Carl Sagan said, within us is a little universe. And if you're looking for the diversity of life, if you're looking for a place where you can see some of the amazing things that life has taken shape for, you can do a little better than the entire human body. And so that's one of the reasons why I'm excited to talk about the diversity of life today. I'm excited to introduce the other speakers. I'm excited to talk about our incredibly crowded microbiome, where your gut bacteria is different than my gut bacteria. And it turns out if you put the right gut bacteria in a person, they actually start losing weight. I can't wait for modern medicine to catch up with my pizza habit. But this diversity goes beyond Darwin figuring out how birds adapted to their island. The classic story, each beak better for whatever was on the island, whether nuts or insects. This diversity goes beyond the classic biology story of these 2 moths. Yeah, there's a dark one on the left. The idea that once, normally, 9 out of 10 were white, 1 out of 10 was a black moth, and then the Industrial Revolution happens. And once you have city trees, the species flips. The diversity of life is us, or I can use Chuck D in this one, but us standing in the middle of the gigantic web of life. This is a diversity that we don't just admire. This is a diversity that we don't just learn about. This is a diversity that we are in the center of. So remember, there are connections here. You're connected to all of these organisms, especially if they scootily poop on your face like that. And that's what I came here to say, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you. So I know if we can get it working, we have an online quiz. But before I call in our online quiz master, are there any questions from the gallery? I would love to get any kinds of questions. Does anyone have a question? Meg, perfect. Yes. Its name is Bagheera pitlingi. If you watch The Jungle Book, Bagheera is the name of the panther who talks to Mowgli about the nature of predators. And so the first name is Bagheera. And if you want to do a Google search, you could just type in Black Panther Jungle Book. And his last name is Kiplingi. I should say the genus is Bagheera. The species is Kiplingi, named after Rudyard Kipling, who wrote the Jungle Book and Just So stories. So yeah, you would not believe how many other stuff is named after really weird kind of pop culture references. Because scientists love naming things oddly. There is a dinosaur named after the lead guitarist of Dire Straits, because that was a rock album that they played while they were making stuff out. One of my favorite dinosaur names is, I can actually find pictures of these guys on my laptop, double check. They found a really big carnivorous dinosaur in China being sold by a farmer, but the farmer really needed the money. So he had taken another dinosaur and glued that bits all over the top one. And had taken a whole bunch of fossil lizards he found and glued that bits over the dinosaur. So it went from looking like some normal creature to some bizarre bone-based Michael Bay transformer. So before they could even name the dinosaur, they had to figure out what all the different stuff was on it. And they named the dinosaur eventually Irritator. I guess that's how they felt. There's another one that has, let me see if I can get this here. Hold on a second, there's a microphone over there. You're looking for interesting scientific names. I'm still very loud because I'm a teacher, so I can always just pretend we're in the cafeteria. All right. There is another creature, another dinosaur, which was found by pop culture fans. And if I can get it up here, I'll be very happy. It's a creature that I think you're going to like. Give me a second. There we go. If we take a look at this, this is Dracorex Hogwartsia. You can see the head. It looks like something out of a fairy tale. All it's missing is wings. So the scientists named it Dracorex Hogwartsia, which means Dragon King of Hogwarts. And J.K. Rowling wrote the paleontologist a letter and said, I am very happy about that. My children are all dinosaur fans, and I love it because it looks just like a Norwegian blue ridgeback dragon. So thank you very much. So sometimes you can get very weird things. I have a gene in my body that's called Sonic Hedgehog. So you'd be very surprised what kind of stuff scientists will name, because they're people, and people occasionally like making jokes. Do we have any other questions about this? Yes, miss?
On your slide that had the little microbiome saying tallest living,
Yeah.
you quoted the Human Microbiome Project. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah. Now, you might have heard of things called probiotics, which the idea is medicine that you put active bacteria into your guts. And that's a good idea. But what we learned is that it doesn't really work, because putting that kind of bacteria into your guts is kind of like saying, I am sick, I need medicine, give me a handful of medicine. And it turns out that the kind of bacteria that we have in our body is so specific that all of you probably have a different internal stomach ecosystem from the person sitting next to you. You probably have similar bacteria to the people that you're related to. But it's almost like you may be the African Sahara, and the person next to you is like the tropical rainforest, and the person next to you is like a desert filled with like cactus, because deserts are filled with what? They have like reptiles and stuff. And so we are filled with all of this stuff that we have no idea what it is. In the same way, there was a great study that came out this week that showed that half of all the bacteria from the New York City subway system is from unknown forms of life, which is a sci-fi original movie that writes itself. It's down there. Right? Guillermo del Toro did that. That was called Mimic. But they're trying to catalog all of the microbiome stuff in us because it's useful. Some of those little species of blobby things fight off invaders for you. Some of those little species of blobby things are better at digesting certain things than others. So if you get something that is better or worse at digesting things, you can control your level of weight gain. So they are trying to figure out all this wonderful stuff inside us. One interesting thing that they've learned is that you actually start in a certain way, possibly with a microbiome disadvantage if you're the product of a cesarean section. Because it turns out a bunch of this stuff is waiting in your mother's birth canal to jump onto you, shake hands with your body's immune system and say, hey, here we are. Let us teach you how to fight viruses and bacteria. So it's entirely possible that we may learn, here, we got to give this shot to any kid that's been born in a cesarean section because they missed out on this. It's incredible how we mostly ignore bacteria, where if an alien landed on this planet, they would think that this is basically the planet of bacteria, and some of them are called humans. I am 90% bacterial cells. There's only 10% of me that is out. The rest are things living on and in me. I should charge rent. Are there any other questions?
A follow-up question?
Okay, follow-up question.
Is it an offshoot of the Human Microbiome Project that I've read that doctors are now thinking when somebody has a gut disease to take a first-degree relative's bacteria out of their guts and transfer them?
Yeah, it turns out that you are generally, the stuff that lives inside you is very much like the stuff you live around, because I don't know about you, but as a foster parent, whenever my kid gets sick, everyone in my family gets it. So these things tend to move around. That's actually kind of why we think we don't need an appendix anymore. Like, the appendix is generally absolutely useless to us, but it used to do something from what we can tell. So we figured out what appendixes do by looking at what countries in the world have the lowest rates of appendicitis. Where are the people where these things blow up the least, and why are they running well? So it turned out in some places, places like Eastern Europe, places where there were very small concentrations of humans, you didn't tend to get appendicitis. So they looked at what those people's appendix were actually doing. And it turns out the appendix just might be a bacterial safe house. Where, let's say, I get some terrible stomach virus. It kills all of my stomach bacteria. Some of them are hiding inside the appendix and poking their little cell membrane heads out and saying, is it okay yet? Can we come out? So in places where there's still a low amount of people, the appendix can be kind of useful. But like, this is the size of a village for most of human existence. So we don't really need it anymore. We can catch so much stuff from each other. We're probably catching stuff from each other right now. I really need to make sure I pick up some aspirin on the way home. So yeah, there are useful things that you can do. And by correlating, does your sister have your same microbiological gut that you do? What's different? What can we do? This is one of the next frontiers of medicine. It's absolutely incredible. Good question. You get 5 points extra on the quiz. I told you there'd be a quiz, right? Yes, sir.
Your black smokers with the bright red tube worms.
Yes.
You think there's no vision down there, no light. Everything else is white or colorless. What's the selectivity for bright red when there's no...
That's an excellent question. He's basically saying the tube worms are bright red. There's no spending lights down there. The angular visions don't even hang around. They're too hipstery. Why would those things develop to be red? And sometimes it's what we call genetic drift. Sometimes it's just the randomness of the gene. Something gets picked up and then it doesn't kill them. In the same way, your and my bones are white. It's just a side effect of the way the chemicals are. We have no survival advantage to having our bones be white, because at the point where our bones are exposed and something gets seen in color, our survival chances are already very low. So it's possible that whatever did that to them in their genetics is an accident, but it's also possible that it's part of a bargain. There are cavefish that have no eyes. The eyes are basically like flesh over. And we assume that they started to lose their eyes because they didn't need them. The very simplistic explanation. What it actually turns out is they had a gene that does two things in one type of cavefish. One, it shrinks and does the screwy stuff to the eyes. Two, it really increases the swimming potential of your fins and your maneuverability. So, the cavefish's eyes kept shrinking, but they kept getting better swimmers. So the ones with the smaller eyes actually did well. Now, if you could talk to the cavefish since they were blind, they would have no idea why Bob is a better swimmer than Sheila. They would just know, yeah, Sheila tends to survive and have more kids. And so this might be going on. There might be some gene inside the tube worm where you have the right chemical to have a reddish color, but it's also the best skin texture for taking in the chemicals from the bacteria. There's an amazing amount of just side effects in natural selection. So those would be my ideas. Any other questions from the audience? Yes, miss?
So how would the deep sea creatures see underwater if there's no light coming in to help them see?
Well, if you don't have vision, then you have to rely on other senses. Now, you and I are very visual creatures. That's why we bother to put these things on. But in terms of our other senses, compared to other organisms, we suck. Let's say that we were being tested by life to see how good we did at smell. And I would be sitting next to a dog. I would probably want to crib off that dog's homework. Because whereas the dog would get like a 90 to 10% on a scent test, I would get a 5%. Like, to other animals, the way that humans smell is as if my eyes were covered in duct tape and I was running around drunk. So, we rely on our vision. Our vision is really good. We're one of the few non-predator species that has binocular vision. Just because we can jump from tree to tree. But if you're down there, you have to rely on other things. You have to rely on the sense of touch more, for instance. If you're touching something, you have to be able to feel that it's vibrating. And the sense of smell is incredibly important too. One of the big feasts down there at the bottom of the ocean, if you're not at the Black Smoke, is whale fall. When a whale dies, it takes about 3 months to sink to the bottom of the ocean. And from that point, it takes 6 months to be entirely eaten. There's a great moment in the BBC show Planet Earth where they show a whale fall, where they show the whale being eaten, and they speed it up. And it's just this massive throng of crabs and hagfish, all these things that look like eels, eating it constantly. Now, they couldn't see the whale. But if you're adapted enough to hear the sound of the whale hitting the ground, or if your sense of touch is good enough that you feel the vibrations, or if your sense of smell is good that you can sense the very small particles of whale, then you can do the good job. So in this case, sight is not very useful to them unless they found something else. And even with sight, there are other animals that use different kinds of sight. We see a blue sky. That's because the sun's light is made of all colors, it hits the atmosphere, and it breaks into colors, and our eyes are better at seeing blue than violet. If our eyes adapted slightly differently, we would have a violet sky, because we see certain colors better. Scorpions and other insects can see into the ultraviolet. When they're trying to find another scorpion to have a date on a lonely desert night, they glow like they're under a black light.
Please join us outside the library for Darwin Day celebration.
I think we all know about that.
Activities all day, dinosaur
But
drawing contest,
the corollary,
celebration, fossil dig, and today at 1 o'clock.
it's like school. Even if they're talking about 2 other teachers, every teacher shuts up when the announcement's going. We're trained like catalogs
We'll
going.
be giving a speech on non-native species in Florida. Please join us in the auditorium at 1 o'clock for Rebecca Harvey. Thank you.
But what I was saying is that they have senses that we don't, and we have senses they don't. Insects and arachnids can't see red. When I have tarantulas, if you put a red light, they think it's completely dark, but you can see it. There's a great issue of the comic Justice League in which everyone is trying to figure out how to fight back a race of invading bee aliens. And Plastic Man says, dude, let's all throw red blankets over each other and then walk into the spaceship. They're like, that's idiotic. It's like, no, I know an entomologist, let's do that. And it works because bees can't see red. So they might be able to see some other kind of radiation, but most likely it's smell, it's touch, it's all of that kind of stuff. Because we're used to thinking if you're blind in nature, you're going to have a problem. But to those organisms, you and I will be blind. Does that make sense? They have a different way of playing the game. And for them, they're always crawling over each other. So So it's sense of touch and it's sense of smell. Oh, I can smell there's food. The same way that if I smell my cat's urine, I look down and say, Samus, why did you do that? But if another cat smells my cat's urine, they say, oh, that's from a healthy female cat, which is 4 years old, and it was here a certain amount ago, and wants me to bug her off. You can tell a lot more from smell. Are there any other questions?